The sanctuary burns. The morning sun cast long shadows across the playground of the Meridian Children's Sanctuary on Haven 7. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched 300 children laugh and play, their voices creating a symphony of joy that echoed across the valley. These weren't ordinary children. They were survivors, refugees from various human colonies that had faced natural disasters, pirate raids, or simple economic collapse. The sanctuary had become their home, their haven, their chance at a future. Elena smiled as she watched Tommy Chen, an 8-year-old whose parents had died in a mining accident, help smaller children onto the swing sets. His resilience amazed her daily. Despite losing everything, he had become a natural leader among the children, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. "Dr. Vasquez, the supply ship is requesting landing clearance," called Captain Marcus Chen, the colony's security chief and Tommy's uncle. Marcus had taken guardianship of his nephew after the accident, but his duties often kept him busy. The sanctuary had become Tommy's real home. "Granted, Captain. We're expecting medical supplies and new learning tablets," Elena replied, adjusting her white coat. She had been a military medic once, serving in the Outer Rim conflicts. But after seeing too much violence, she had chosen a different path: healing, teaching, protecting innocence. The afternoon proceeded normally. Children attended their classes, played in the gardens, and helped with small chores around the facility. The sanctuary operated on principles of community and mutual support. Even the youngest children understood they were part of something special, something worth protecting. As evening approached, Elena was reviewing medical records in her office when the first alarm sounded. Not the gentle chime that signaled dinner time or quiet hour, but the sharp, piercing whip bell that meant danger, real danger. Marcus's voice crackled through the communication system, tense and urgent. "All staff, this is not a drill. We have multiple bogies approaching fast. Get the children to the underground shelters immediately." Elena's training kicked in instantly. She had drilled this scenario dozens of times with her staff, hoping it would never be necessary. The children moved with practiced efficiency, older ones helping younger ones down the reinforced stairs to the bunkers beneath the main building. But something was wrong. The approaching ships weren't broadcasting identification codes. They weren't responding to hails, and they were moving in attack formation. The first energy blast struck the eastern dormitory, vaporizing the building in a flash of superheated plasma. Elena felt the shockwave through the ground as she helped the last group of children into the shelter. Through the thick, transparent steel windows, she could see the attackers clearly now. Zephyrian Empire vessels, sleek, predatory ships with the distinctive blue and silver markings of their military. But why? Haven 7 was a peaceful colony. The sanctuary was clearly marked as a civilian facility. Children's drawings decorated the outer walls, visible from orbit. The bombardment continued for 17 minutes. When it finally stopped, Elena emerged from the shelter with her staff to find their world transformed into a nightmare of twisted metal and burning debris. The dormitories were gone. The school buildings, reduced to craters. The medical center, where she had treated countless scraped knees and broken bones, was nothing but rubble. Of the 300 children who had been playing that morning, only 47 survived. They huddled in the shelter, traumatized and confused, asking questions that Elena couldn't answer. Why had this happened? What had they done wrong? Where their friends? Marcus arrived at dawn with a rescue team from the main colony settlement. His face was stone, but Elena could see the rage burning in his eyes as he surveyed the destruction. The captain knelt beside Tommy, who sat silently staring at the ruins of his home. "Uncle Marcus," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. "Sarah was going to show me her drawing today. She was making a picture of Earth. She said it was blue and green and beautiful." Marcus pulled his nephew close, and for a moment the hardened security chief's composure cracked. "I know, buddy. I know." The investigation began immediately. The colony's data recorders had captured everything. The Zephyrian ships had targeted civilian structures deliberately, methodically. They had ignored the clearly marked medical facilities, the peaceful nature of the colony, the obvious presence of children. But the most damning evidence came from intercepted Zephyrian communications. The attack hadn't been a mistake or a case of mistaken identity. It had been a test, a deliberate strike against human civilians to gauge their response, to see if humanity would break under pressure. Commander Zektar's voice was clear in the recordings. "Target the young ones. Humans are emotional creatures. Break their spirit by showing them we can reach their most vulnerable, and they will surrender without significant resistance." Elena listened to those words in the colony's command center, surrounded by other survivors and rescue workers. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, people began to stand, not in surrender, but in defiance. Marcus spoke first, his voice carrying across the room. "I served in the Outer Rim Wars. I've seen combat, seen good people die. But this..." He gestured toward the ruins of the sanctuary. "This changes everything." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the peaceful healer who had devoted her life to protect young children, felt something shift inside her. The military medic she had tried to bury was awakening, and she wasn't alone. "They think we're soft because we value life," she said, standing beside Marcus. "They think our compassion is weakness. They're about to learn how wrong they are." Communications began streaming in from across human space. Word of the Haven 7 massacre spread like wildfire through the colonial networks. On Earth, in the outer colonies, aboard merchant vessels and research stations, humanity began to stir. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled a section of the galaxy for 3 centuries, through intimidation and calculated cruelty. They had never faced an opponent that valued its young the way humans did. They had never encountered a species that would transform overnight when its children were threatened. The United Colonial Council convened an emergency session within hours of the attack. Representatives from dozens of worlds participated via quantum link, their faces grim and determined. The debate was brief. There would be no negotiations, no diplomatic solutions, no measured responses. "The Zephyrian Empire wanted to test our resolve," declared Admiral Sarah Mitchell, the fleet commander known throughout human space as Iron Wolf, for her tactical brilliance. "They will have their answer." Elena volunteered to testify before the council, her voice steady as she described the attack and its aftermath. But it was Tommy who provided the most powerful testimony. The 8-year-old stood before the assembled representatives and spoke with a clarity that silenced the room. "My friend Sarah was drawing Earth," he said simply. "She wanted to see it someday. Now she never will. Someone should make sure that doesn't happen to other children." The vote was unanimous. For the first time in human history, every colony, every faction, every political entity spoke. With one voice. The Zephyrian Empire had awakened something they didn't understand and couldn't control. As Elena tucked Tommy into his bed in the temporary shelter that night, he looked up at her with eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "Dr. Elena, are we going to fight them?" She smoothed his hair, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, Tommy, when someone hurts children, grown-ups have to make sure it never happens again. That's what we're going to do." Outside, the night sky was filled with the running lights of ships. Human vessels from across the galaxy were converging on Haven 7, not for evacuation, but for war. The peaceful colony world was transforming into a staging ground for humanity's response. Marcus stood in the command center, coordinating the arriving forces with military precision that surprised even Elena. She realized that many of her fellow colonists had hidden depths, skills, and experiences they had set aside for peaceful lives that no longer existed. "The first wave launches at dawn," Marcus told her. "We're not just responding to an attack. We're sending a message that will echo across the galaxy for generations." As Elena looked out at the ruins of the sanctuary, she made a silent promise to the children who would never grow up, never see Earth's blue skies, or draw pictures of distant worlds. The Zephyrian Empire had wanted to test humanity's resolve by targeting innocence itself. They were about to discover that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their numbers. It was their absolute unwavering refusal to let evil triumph over innocence. and now that refusal had been weaponized. When predators awaken, the transformation began before dawn. Captain Marcus Chen stood in the command center of what had once been Haven 7's agricultural processing facility, now hastily converted into a military operations hub. Around him, colonists who had been farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers just days before worked with rim efficiency. Their peaceful lives, a memory as distant as the stars. The first strike force consisted of 30 ships, nothing impressive by galactic standards. But these weren't ordinary vessels. Every merchant freighter had been retrofitted with concealed weapons. Every mining ship now carried military-grade explosives. Humanity had learned something the Zephyrian Empire would soon understand. Peaceful people often make the most dangerous enemies because they know exactly what they're fighting for. Elena watched the preparations from the medical bay she had established in the shelter complex. Tommy sat beside her, quietly helping sort medical supplies. The boy had insisted on staying busy, and she understood why. In activity, there was purpose. In purpose, there was healing. "Dr. Elena," Tommy said suddenly, holding up a small communication device. "I've been listening to the radio chatter. The other human colonies are angry too." She looked at the device, realizing Tommy had been monitoring military communications with the intelligence of a child who had lost his innocence too early. The reports flooding in were staggering. Across human space, colony after colony was mobilizing. Not just military forces, but civilians. Entire populations were volunteering for support roles, offering ships, supplies, information. The Zephyrian Empire had miscalculated catastrophically. They had expected fear, submission, scattered resistance at most. Instead, they had created unity. For the first time in human history, every human settlement from Earth to the furthest frontier spoke with one voice. "This will not stand." Marcus's voice echoed through the compound as the first strike force prepared to launch. "Remember, we're not trying to match their firepower. We're going to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than they expect. They think humans are predictable. Let's show the CZ otherwise." The first target was a Zephyrian supply depot 3 systems away. Intelligence reports indicated minimal defenses, a routine logistics hub that supported their frontier operations. It should have been an easy victory for any competent military force. What the Zephyrians hadn't counted on was human creativity under pressure. The attack began with what appeared to be a merchant convoy requesting assistance with engine problems. Standard protocol would have the depot's security team investigate, possibly offer aid. Instead, when the Zephyrian ships approached, the disabled freighters revealed their true nature. Hidden weapons ports opened along their hulls. The cargo holds that should have contained grain or manufactured goods instead held fighter craft piloted by former racing pilots and cargo haulers who had learned combat flying in weeks rather than years. The depot was destroyed in 12 minutes, but more importantly, the engagement was broadcast across human communication networks, analyzed, dissected, and improved upon by thousands of tactical minds working in concert. Admiral Sarah Mitchell coordinated the broader strategy from her flagship, the UCS Defiance, newly commissioned as humanity's first true warship. The Iron Wolf had earned her nickname through decades of tactical brilliance, but even she was impressed by the innovations emerging from the colonies. "They're adapting faster than I've ever seen," she reported to the Colonial Council. "Every engagement teaches them something new, and they're applying those lessons immediately." The second wave of attacks came within days, but these were different. Where the first strike had been conventional, the second showed humanity's growing understanding of asymmetric warfare. A Zephyrian patrol fleet investigating the destroyed depot found themselves facing what appeared to be a field of space debris. Standard PR. Procedure would be to scan for survivors, valuable materials, or intelligence. Instead, the debris field came alive. Hidden among the wreckage were dozens of small craft, barely large enough for a single pilot, equipped with oversized engines and high-yield explosives. The Zephyrians called them suicide boats, but humans had a different name, stingers. fast, maneuverable, and devastating when used by pilots who understood that sometimes the most effective weapon was commitment. Commander Zektar received reports of the patrol fleet's destruction with growing unease. This wasn't the human response his intelligence reports had predicted. Where was the measured diplomatic protest, the limited military response, the eventual negotiated settlement? "Sir," his aide reported, voice tense with uncertainty, "we're receiving fragmentary communications from across human space. It appears they're mobilizing their entire civilian population." "Impossible," Zektar replied. "No species sustains that level of military commitment without central authority forcing compliance. Humans are too individualistic, too chaotic." But the reports continued. Mining colonies were converting their industrial equipment into weapons. Agricultural worlds were contributing their entire harvests to feed the war effort. Even Earth itself, the human homeworld that had remained neutral in most galactic conflicts, had declared total mobilization. Back on Haven 7, Elena found herself coordinating not just medical support, but intelligence gathering and psychological warfare. Her background in military medicine had included training in battlefield psychology, and she was applying those skills on a galactic scale. "They're starting to understand," she told Marcus as they reviewed intercepted Zephyrian communications. "Their soldiers are asking questions they never asked before. Why are humans so committed to this fight? Why don't they negotiate? Why does every human seem willing to die rather than surrender?" The answer was evident in every human action, every tactical choice, every strategic decision. The Zephyrian Empire had attacked children, not military targets, not strategic assets, but innocents whose only crime was existing in human space. Tommy had become an unofficial symbol of the war effort, his image broadcast across human networks not as propaganda, but as a reminder of what they were fighting for. The 8-year-old handled the attention with remarkable maturity, understanding that his survival meant something to billions of people he would never meet. "I remember all their names," he told a reporter during one interview. "Sarah, Michael, Lisa, all of them. When this is over, I'm going to make sure everyone knows they were here, that they mattered." The war escalated rapidly. What had begun as targeted strikes evolved into systematic dismantling of Zephyrian infrastructure. Human forces didn't just attack military targets. They targeted the economic and social systems that supported Zephyrian expansion. Supply lines were severed with surgical precision. Colonial administrative centers were captured intact, their records used to identify and liberate populations enslaved by Zephyrian expansion. Most importantly, humanity began demonstrating the very qualities the Zephyrians had tried to exploit. When human forces captured Zephyrian civilians, they were treated with medical care and dignity. When Zephyrian soldiers surrendered, they were processed as prisoners of war rather than executed. The contrast with Zephyrian tactics was stark and deliberate. "We're not trying to become them," Admiral Mitchell explained to her staff. "We're showing the galaxy who we really are. The attack on Haven 7 was meant to prove humans were weak. Instead, it's proving we're stronger than they ever imagined." The psychological impact was devastating to Zephyrian morale. O had been told humans were inferior beings, suitable only for conquest, found themselves facing opponents who fought with both ruthless efficiency and moral conviction. Commander Zektar's forces began experiencing mass desertions. Entire units refused orders to attack human civilian targets. The rigid military hierarchy that had sustained Zephyrian expansion for centuries began to fracture under the weight of a war they no longer understood. The final battle came sooner than anyone expected. The Zephyrian High Command, desperate to salvage their position, assembled their primary battle fleet for a decisive strike against Earth itself. If they could break human resolve by threatening the homeworld, perhaps the war could still be won. They were wrong. The fleet that met them in Earth's outer system was unlike anything seen in galactic history. Not just military vessels, but converted civilian craft, mining ships, research vessels, and colony transports all working in perfect coordination. Humanity had turned their entire civilization into a weapon focused on a single purpose. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Zephyrian Empire's military power was broken beyond repair. More importantly, every major species in the galaxy had witnessed humanity's transformation from peaceful settlers to implacable warriors. But the most profound change wasn't tactical or strategic. It was personal. Elena stood with Tommy in the memorial garden they had built on the site of the destroyed sanctuary. 300 small trees grew there now, one for each child who had died. Tommy placed a small drawing beside Sarah's tree, a picture of Earth he had painted from memory of her descriptions. "Do you think they would be proud of what we became?" he asked. Elena considered the question carefully. Humanity had won the war, but the cost was measured in more than ships and lives. They had discovered capacities for both creation and destruction that would change them forever. "I think they would be proud that we made sure no other children will suffer what they suffered," she replied. "And I think they would want us to remember that the reason we fought wasn't to become warriors, but to remain human." The Zephyrian Empire requested terms of surrender 3 months later, but by then, humanity had already begun planning for the peace. Schools were being rebuilt, colonies re-established, and children born who would grow up in a galaxy where targeting innocents was no longer considered a viable military strategy. The universe had learned that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology, their numbers, or their military capabilities. It was their absolute refusal to accept that evil could triumph over innocence. And anyone who forgot that lesson would discover, as the Zephyrians had, that sometimes the most dangerous predators are those who only hunt when their young are threatened.